Welcome to Legal Lines. This program is brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation. My name is Tom O'Shea, the host of this program, and today's topic is immigration law. And my guest is Mary Weaver. Mary is the executive director of Perk, which stands for the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what does Perk do?
Yeah. Perk is a nonprofit law firm. We're based here in York, and we have 5 attorneys and 3 paralegals who provide services. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, so we've been in business, so to speak, since 1996. We provide legal representation, advocacy, and education for immigrants who are in civil detention facing removal. And we also provide legal representation to immigrants who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and other crimes in a 9-county region, including York County. So in a nutshell, that's what we do.
All right. Let me ask first about civil detention. What does that mean?
Yeah. Civil detention means that the immigrants who are at the York County prison are there held at the prison for the sole purpose to make sure they show up at their hearing. There are 3 immigration courts housed within the York County prison campus. And so their detention is for administrative proceedings. It's not because they've committed, they're not in detention there because they've committed a crime. They're there in civil detention waiting for their proceedings.
Okay. And York County actually has an immigration court.
Yeah, 3.
And, the 3 courtrooms?
3 courtrooms, sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
3 courtrooms. Yeah. and one of the questions I asked, and I've practiced law in York for a long time, is where is that courthouse? And I always knew it was near the prison, but I didn't realize it was in the prison.
Yeah, you have
so
to.
The courtrooms are actually in the prison, which is where people would have their detention hearings. Now, really simple, what does a detention hearing mean?
When someone's in a removal proceedings or deportation proceedings or the detention hearing, as you want to call it, basically the federal government is charging an individual with a violation of some law that makes them removable or deportable.
Now, this doesn't mean a criminal law by any chance. This means an immigration law that they're here illegally.
Right, unlawfully, that they don't have documents that permit them to be in the country lawfully, and that makes them removable. So the individuals who are in detention, immigrants in detention, go before an immigration judge, and there's a government prosecutor. The immigrant, more than 80% of the time, doesn't have an attorney. They go what's called pro se, they represent themselves, and they both, before the immigration judge, talk about the situation with the individual, what has caused them to be put into removal proceedings, what options that person might have. And then the decision's made by the judge whether or not that person should be deported or not.
Right. So the attorneys who work for Perk, they represent these people?
They do. We do. Yes, we do. Our attorneys do.
Okay. Unlike in other areas of law where there's a constitutional right to an attorney, and in a criminal proceeding the state has to pay for counsel.
Public defenders, right.
Public defenders.
Yeah.
There is no such right for
No.
people in detention or in the immigration courts.
Correct.
So if someone cannot afford an attorney, they would basically be pro se, which means act without an attorney.
Right.
They'd be their own counsel.
Right.
Can you tell us what the benefit of having an attorney would be? Because immigration law is something that's very complicated to most of us who don't practice immigration law.
I've often heard people compare it to the INA, which is the Immigration Nationality Act. They compare it to IRS statutes, that it's more complicated than that, meaning that there's been so much incrementalism and things tweaked around the edges, and there's case precedents and policy memorandums that you have to be dedicated to that area of law to practice it well. But the difference between being represented and not being represented is really hard to overstate how important it is to have an attorney. At a minimum, it's 3 times, I've seen research, as much as 11 times more likely that a person would be granted asylum if they have an attorney standing next to them than if they don't. So it's really critically important to have an attorney represent you.
Can you tell us what asylum means?
Yeah, sure. So asylum is similar to an individual who's seeking refuge in the United States. And it's basically someone who has fled some form of persecution, and they are seeking the protections of the United States laws to allow them to stay in the United States. asylum is actually really difficult to be granted asylum. The United States participates in the same conventions and same definitions, if you will, of what asylum and refugees are that the UN, and it's an international standard. And you have to qualify under 5 different bases, and you also have to prove that there was either government involvement or the government failed to protect you. So all I am trying to explain by going into that level of detail just is that it's a pretty high standard, and you don't just walk into a courtroom and ask for asylum and have it granted. So having an attorney help you is really important. But we also provide a lot of education as a way of helping people that aren't represented.
Okay. And just to give the scope of the issue here, how many detainees are there at the York County prison in this civil detention?
Yep. Monday there were 695. Of the 695, I don't know the exact count, but around 100 are women, and the rest are men. So at any point in time, our staff is going, Perk staff is going into the prison and trying to help that many people. It's really a kind of a David and Goliath situation. And that's the average stay. And some people move through the system quickly. Some people are there for months at a time. But that's the average population.
So it's close to 700 people, and that would be a large population within the York County prison, actually.
It is.
And just as a brief history, can
Sure.
you tell us how this started in York?
Yeah, and probably a lot of people have heard of the Golden Venture. So in 1993, the Golden Venture was this freighter that ran aground off Long Island, the Rockaways. And on this freighter were over 300 Chinese nationals who were fleeing. Most of them were fleeing the course of population control policies of China, the one baby policy. Some were fleeing political persecution stemming from Tiananmen Square. And the ship ran aground. They were all taken into. Some unfortunately died, but the ones that survived were taken into custody. And they were for about 48 hours in Lower Manhattan in what was INS at the time custody. And then they were put on buses and brought to York County, where there were no immigration attorneys, and held at the York County prison and subject to expedited hearings. And that process, for anybody again who's familiar with it, went on for a number of years. Those individuals that were not granted asylum or released or voluntarily left were held in prolonged detention for almost 4 years, and it took President Clinton to say, okay, we need to release these people, we can't just hold people indefinitely. And it was during that process that there was an unprecedented response from the Bar Association, York County Bar Association, and within the community, the faith-based community, to really try to help these individuals out. And in the course of helping all these individuals out, there were those who identified the fact that this is going to be an ongoing need. So 1993 was when the Golden Venture ran aground, and 1996 was when Perk was founded as a nonprofit to continue helping asylum seekers, regardless of what country they come from, with their day in court, to be able to provide them with a voice before an immigration judge.
And although the original detainees that were brought to York County were from China,
right?
After that occurred,
they're all
immigration
over the world.
started sending detainees from
Yes.
all over
Yes.
to York County.
Yes. So we represent or help people, providing education and pro se assistance from people from Somalia, Sudan, Ghana, Nigeria, different countries in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Peru, Venezuela. So you get the picture.
And with that picture, I'm thinking of all the different languages that need to be serviced. And how is that done?
Well, all of our staff is bilingual. They're bilingual English-Spanish, and probably 70% of the individuals held in immigration detention are Spanish-speaking, which is great. So staff can speak to them directly. For individuals who are not fluent in English or Spanish, we have a language line that we use. So we communicate with those people through a phone interpreter, essentially. All our materials are in their preferred language. So all the materials that we provide, legal guidance, legal orientation, education about what our laws are all about, what their rights are in the court, what their rights are not, are all it's in Urdu, it's in Spanish, it's in French, it's in Creole, it's in Ukrainian, it's in Russian. So you get the idea. Yeah,
And I want to also switch over to the other clients that Perk represents, because it's not just detainees that Perk represents. Can you tell us about what the other part of your mission is?
Yeah, sure. So this again was something that came out of the York County community. In 2009, there were some individuals in the community, the YWCA Hanover, the YWCA of York, Perk, some immigration attorneys, now Judge Bilcock, but at the time he was an immigration attorney, who were noticing that there seemed to be an uptick in the number of immigrant victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so an email was circulated, like, are you seeing an uptick? Long story short, a completely volunteer working group was formed, and that went on for about a year in terms of trying to figure out how to connect these victims to resources. It became a program of Perk late 2010, early 2011, and since then we've gone from York and then York to Adams to we now serve 9 counties in South Central Pennsylvania. We are the attorney for an immigrant victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and other crimes. So we're there to give voice to people who really have no one else to turn to.
Can you tell us why it's so important for there to be attorneys who basically specialize in dealing with immigrants who are victims of abuse, of whatever type of abuse, as opposed to just anybody else who would be the victim of abuse?
Yeah, well, I think there's some specific things about immigrant victims that are helpful for the attorneys that are representing them to be aware of and to be trained in. So not only is it the sections of immigration law that are very specialized, that provide remedies for these individuals, but there's an element with those victims that you don't see in other victims, which is their lack of immigration status as used as an element of control. So some of these victims may have come in with a visitor's visa or a fiancé visa, and for one reason or another fell out of status, or they may come in as a child. They were brought in and they unlawfully, and they grew up undocumented and became a victim of abuse. So understanding how an abuser will threaten that victim and say, you know, if you complain about the abuse, I'll just report you to immigration, you'll be deported. You'll never see your kids again. And it's a really effective way to control someone. And what we have found is that by doing a tremendous amount of outreach, by partnering with the great YWCAs of York County and the other 8 counties that we're in, that those put tendrils out into the community so that people know if you're an immigrant victim, you can come to us. It's free, it's confidential. We're going to screen you and tell you whether or not you're eligible. If you are eligible, we're going to be your attorney. That was a long answer for your question.
No, that's a good answer.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Just to stress the point, you said that the fact that they're undocumented is basically a threat that the abuser can use. So in other words, somebody in a domestic situation, the
people's fear of immigration, they will put up with a lot of abuse, and we've seen victims where, I mean, they've just been abused for a number of years. And sometimes the tipping point is that the abuse was so horrible that was the tipping points. For some people, it will be just, I can't do this, I can't subject my kids to this violent home anymore. And they'll leave for their kids. But it takes a lot of courage to step forward and say, I'm undocumented, I know you can remove me. I have children. I don't want to be separated from my children. Can you help me? It takes a lot of courage.
And you work together with the YWCA and
they're great.
Of other counties, et cetera, and they have and their abuse
their victim
shelters.
Assistance Center, their domestic violence shelters, their sexual assault, their rape crisis centers. All of those wonderful staff partner with us, and we really, I think, do a great job together of serving that population. It's not most of the people they serve, right? Most people they serve are not immigrants or citizens, but we recognize that this is a particularly vulnerable population. They've really stepped up to the plate and do a wonderful job of partnering with us.
Well, that's terrific. We only have a few seconds left in this section. We'll be back in a few moments. My name is Tom O'Shea. This is Legal Lines. I'm here with Mary Weaver, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Legal Lines. Our program today is about immigration law. My guest is Mary Weaver, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Immigration Project, which is also known as Perk. Pennsylvania Immigration Center, known as Perk. And Mary, we were talking about what Perk does for basically immigration law, and that the fact that York County actually has 3 immigration courtrooms that are centered at the York County prison. There's roughly 700 detainees on immigration cases on any given day, and also the work that Perk does for victims of domestic violence who happen to be undocumented people who are in this country. One of the things I want to touch on is one of the first things you said, that Perk is a non-profit law firm. Non-profit, your clients aren't paying you.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So what does that? How is it funded?
Right. So instead of being able to bill the client, so to speak, everything we do is free for the clients. They're all, they have no resources, so they would have no way of paying us anyway. So we have to find money to pay for all of the staff and all of our overhead and our copy machines and our phones. And so nonprofit means that we rely on the generosity of people who are willing to contribute from the community. We do apply for grants, so we do get grant money from the federal government, and we do get grant money from foundations, including the York County Bar Foundation, who's been very generous. And we couldn't do the work that we do without all of those contributions. And really, the important thing too for us is when we receive contributions from individuals in the community, it allows us to do the extra things that you aren't allowed to do under some of the grant requirements. So for example, sometimes we might be assisting someone who's in detention, and they came into the country as a refugee, and they might be in detention because they had a minor theft charge. That minor theft charge under state law was completely, you paid a fine and no one cared. But immigration law is so harsh that it might make them removable. So now we can take the money that people donate to us, and the only thing holding them back from getting a green card is they have to have a medical exam. Because the judge is like, yeah, you qualify, if this is a minor crime, you qualify to get the green card, but they have to have a medical exam for that. So that's just an example of something that we don't get grant funding for that. So we really rely on contributions for things like that make a difference. And really it's the difference between that person being deported back to a country that they fled as a refugee and being allowed to stay in the United States with a green card.
Okay, and as a nonprofit, you qualify as a 501c3 corporation, which means that any contribution is tax deductible.
Yep.
And if someone wanted to make a contribution, how would they contact you?
They could go to our website. It's www.perklaw.org, which is P.I.R.C.L.A.W.org. We have a donate tab over to the right on our homepage, and you can go down and you can, you have a couple different options for donating. You can also, our address is at the website if you want to just send us a check. You can designate how you want it spent, or we'll put it to good use in a lot of ways.
Now, in addition to the fact of helping people, detainees as well as the victims of basically domestic violence, there's also an economic impact for the community that you're providing. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So it's really wonderful because when we are able to represent, let's just use the example of someone who's a victim of domestic violence, and maybe they came in on a fiancé visa, their spouse didn't do what they were supposed to do paperwork-wise, so now they're undocumented, they're abused. When we represent them, we're first helping them get a work card. Work card is photo ID that allows them to work lawfully. Up to that point, they may have been not working at all or working unlawfully. So they get a work card. Now, all of a sudden, as anyone knows who's an employer, you have to have proof that someone can work lawfully, right? So now your access to better jobs just like multiplies exponentially. So they're getting better wages. They may have been paying taxes because you can still pay taxes if you're undocumented, but if whether you were or you weren't, having better wages means they're paying more taxes. So they're paying more money into the community. There's also a multiplier effect. So now you take someone who may have been making little or no money to making a decent salary. As we all know, people who are of limited means spend everything they make, right? They live paycheck to paycheck. And that has a multiplier effect in the local economy. So every dollar that's spent has a benefit to the community. they also go on after they get a work card to getting a green card, which then leads them to citizenship. And it just opens all kinds of avenues for them with regards to education and better health care outcomes. So they're not going to emergency rooms for their health care. They actually have health insurance that they can now, be a little more proactive about their health care. So all of those things, when you add them up together, have an economic benefit. And do you want me to talk about the York County Bar Foundation?
Right.
Yeah, they did. The York County Bar Foundation funded an economic impact study back in 2014, and they looked at mid-pen legal services and Perk to see what are the benefits of those services to the poor in the county. And what they found was that for every dollar that you donate to Perk or mid-pen, there's a 9-fold impact to the community. So every dollar that you give us, we turn around and it benefits the community 9-fold.
For all the things you just mentioned.
For all of the reasons we just mentioned. It's obviously, it's through the things that we do to help that person,
healthcare,
that they all of a sudden, they step out of the darkness, if you will, and they're fully involved in the community. They can access the banking system, they can buy a house, all these wonderful things that allow them to be completely participating members in the community. And that all has an economic impact for everyone who lives in the community.
Okay. And in addition to representing immigrants in court proceedings, Perk offers a lot of other services. Can you tell us some of those?
Sure. So we jumped to the direct representation, but in detention, as you mentioned, there's 700 individuals in detention each day. The first thing that we do, it's kind of a triaging effect, is we go in and we do what's called a general orientation. It's a classroom setting, and we just say, do you even know why you're here? You're going to have a hearing. What's the judge going to say? Who else is going to be in the room with you? Well, there's a prosecutor from the government, right? What rights do you have? What rights do you not have? This is a very brief summary of what the laws are here. Do you see how some of these might benefit you? And there's actually a series. We do workshops, we do one-on-one. But all of that education prepares individuals to represent themselves. Because I had mentioned earlier, more than 80% of the immigrants who go before an immigration judge to have that judge determine whether they should be deported and separated from family and sent back to a country they may have fled, or whether they get to stay, that more than 80% represent themselves. So we try very hard to provide as much support. We translate documents, we do country conditions research, we take them through their classes, because we can't be everyone's attorney. So that's the education piece of what we do.
Okay,
yeah.
That's very good. And then what I really would like to get to is before we end the program is a recent U.S. Supreme Court case.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that for people who are following this, it's really, I'm sure they saw it in the news, but it can't be emphasized enough that on June 23rd, the Supreme Court issued a decision on United States versus Texas. It was because of Justice Scalia's passing, there's only 8 justices now, and it was a 4-4 tie. So what that means is that all of the appeals that had gone up to the Supreme Court, with a tie, it basically reverts to the lower court. So the short message is that deferred action for parental accountability, which everybody calls DAPA, and expanded deferred action for childhood arrivals, which people call expanded DACA, that President Obama had in November 2014 said, hey, let's offer these programs to individuals who are undocumented. It's not a path to green card, it's not a path to citizenship, but given our limited resources, let's take the people who are the lowest priority and let's just allow them to work lawfully and use some discretion. And it's a program that you can apply for. So the president in November 2014 said, I'm going to take the same program I did in June of 2012, I'm just going to grow it a little. Yeah, too much detail?
No,
oh, sorry.
I just want to break it down
sure,
for our
sorry.
viewers, because these terms are very clear to you, and those of us who don't do immigration law, they're not as clear. And I know there's some political sides that people take on these issues. I don't want to get into any political side one way or the other, okay? But basically, DACA.
Yeah.
Now, can you explain that?
Sure. So it was in June of 2012, President Obama issued an executive order, deferred action for childhood arrivals. And it was, some people will say, in response to the failure for Congress to pass what's called the DREAM Act. And those pieces of legislation were saying, we recognize that among this undocumented population, there is a subset of undocumented individuals who came in as children. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who came in with their mom and their dad, or they came in with an aunt, and they were 1 or 2 or 5 or 6. This is the country, they've only known this country. They oftentimes don't even speak the language of the country that they were born in. So they were brought into the country without documents, so now they're undocumented. And they have no path to any kind of status that's immediate, short of immigration reform. But what the president was saying with DACA was that they're really not a high priority for us. So let's allow them to ask for discretion and basically come forward and say, I'm undocumented. I came in as a child. Would you please use your discretion and not remove me and allow me to have a work card and allow me to then get a driver's license, allow me to go to college, allow me to live a more complete life. So DACA is a form of discretion that the government has allowed for children who came into the country undocumented, who have not committed any crimes, and it's just a temporary...
And they might not be children anymore, but they
Correct.
were brought into the
yes,
country.
Sorry, yes, you're absolutely right.
Basically,
yes.
not knowing they were brought into the country because they were too young to have any say in the matter.
Yep, they could be 30 years old right now, you're right, but they were brought in as a child, yeah.
So then basically they've only lived in the United States their whole lives. And
yeah, they've gone to school here. You and your classmates would never know that they're undocumented. Do you know what I mean? It's really a very, in my opinion, sympathetic population, and it was, in my opinion, a very good use of the federal government's discretion in choosing to not,
Okay. Well, now, was DACA itself challenged as whether or not it was constitutional?
Well, initially it was challenged, but it never went up to the Supreme Court like what was done in November 2014.
Right, but so what was the ultimate outcome with DACA? This is
2012?
The children, the people who were brought in as children.
So DACA 2012 is still active. If you fall under, or if you're eligible under the guidelines of that program, you can still apply for it.
Okay, and as you say apply for it, it means that you basically tell some government agency that...
There's an application process.
Right.
So what you need to do is find a trusted immigration organization or a trusted immigration attorney, legal service provider that understands the program and that can help you fill out that application. You pay a fee, it's a pretty high fee, and you send it in, and you're basically asking through this application of the U.S. government, will you please grant me this deferred action status? And if they say yes, then you get, a little card, or you get a work card, assuming you apply for that too.
And a work card is different than a green card.
Correct.
It basically, a work card says, I qualify for this program, and an employer can hire me and will not get in any trouble.
Exactly. I'm on the I-9 list. I'm allowed to be employed.
All right, we only have about a minute left, but DAPA is what the Supreme Court recently didn't make a decision on because it was 4-4. So the decision of the Texas Court of Appeal, the Federal Court of Appeals for Texas, which I believe is the Fifth Circuit, basically that stands, which says that DAPA is unconstitutional.
And it just cannot be a program, and so do not apply for DAPA
now,
is
DAPA,
the message.
again, means?
Deferred Action for Parental Accountability.
So we only have a few seconds left.
But what it was saying was that if you have a child who's a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, but you're undocumented and you're a low priority for removal as far as the government's concerned, this was another way of offering work cards and temporary deferred status to those individuals.
But now those individuals will not
qualify.
No,
so don't apply. Please don't apply.
We have to end it there. Our time is up. My guest was Mary Weaver. We talked about immigration law, and this is Legal Lines.